Let's see. Pull this over so you don't have to see this. All right. Ready to see this?
Yeah, I guess you should kick off the slideshow view or however you do it. But
yeah. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining. You've got Dom and I. Dom from STI. I'm Andy from DataStream. Sort of steadily. We're going to cover here a little bit, kind of the threat that's facing small businesses. And give some perspective, both from kind of the perspective of the technical side of the world, MSPs, as well as from those of us in the cyber insurance space. So before we kick things off, Dom, do you have any sort of introductory remarks that you want to make, or anything you'd like to say before we kind of kick off into the presentation?
Sure. Well, I just wanted to. I think it makes sense to just start off by saying we partnered with DataStream because we have a significant amount of experience, not just dealing with implementing cybersecurity and managing cybersecurity controls for small businesses, but we've also been involved quite a bit on the incident response side, dealing with significant breaches, whether it be information compromise, ransomware, what have you. And the reason we wanted to do this together with DataStream is that cyber insurance is now a critical part of this whole picture. So we wanted to kind of bring together both sides of it, right? The cybersecurity controls and management, as well as the cyber insurance that backs all that up. So that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, no, great points, Dom. And I think, obviously this, we're sort of in the wake of what was a pretty significant ransomware event with Colonial Pipeline in the last couple of weeks, and I think so much of a conversation sort of nationally around how do we deal with these types of incidents that are literally affecting businesses, are affecting kind of our daily lives. Kind of pictures on TV of people lined up around the block waiting for gas, and I think it is really a story of collaboration, right? And that you've got to see kind of the different players in the ecosystem on the good guy side, working together to try to address it. And I think one of the things is just to bring, what's happening on the insurance side and what's happening on the technology side together. So that was one of the reasons that we decided to partner with STI on this and some of the other efforts that we're doing, just to help make sure that customers are prepared. So just to sort of jump into this deck, right? A couple of statistics for folks that if they, haven't seen the latest, right? And I think small businesses are just getting targeted a ton. And while in the news you see kind of the Colonials of the world, right? This is hitting as many small businesses. They just aren't making the news. So 68% of businesses experienced some type of attack last year, and when they are successful, the average cost of those is easily running north of $1 million, right? And I think the scary stat, and we've heard so many sort of stories that'll literally just bring you to tears, of businesses that end up having to file for bankruptcy, and literally 25% of companies that end up having an event end up filing for bankruptcy. And so, it's pretty simple. Why are small businesses getting targeted? You guys have funds, whether it's your own funds, whether it's your client funds, and attackers are going after that through fraudulent transfer and other means. The second is that you have sort of confidential data, and you have secrets, whether that's credit card numbers or healthcare records or other things. I think what's been really interesting is that a lot of stuff that wasn't classically what would get stolen. Embarrassing contract details or pictures, etc., has also gotten taken and then often blackmailed for. And I think the third is that the area that's sort of been emerging, which is what you saw literally with Colonial, is that even businesses that classically didn't think would be targeted, but because they rely on kind of 24/7 operations, the ability to disrupt that with electronic means means that they're also vulnerable, and they're forced to pay a ransom. And I think you've seen that across a lot of businesses. It's sort of a rare organization that doesn't have some sort of connected devices that, if they get disrupted, are not going to significantly impact the business. A couple of examples just pulled from the headlines over the last couple of years across different, every type of business is getting hit, whether that's, in the real estate space, an auto dealership, hospitality, construction. I mean, and the list, we could literally have hundreds of slides with different companies that got hit. I mean, I think the statistics from the FBI report, it came out, they saw 4,000 incidents per day reported to them. I mean, it's just massive.
I think it's important to note that when it comes to the small and medium-sized businesses, right, hackers are, and this slide shows it well, and Andy's going to talk about in a second, but really hackers have kind of shifted away from, the big fish, the enterprise organizations, and found that the small businesses, as they're starting to come online, are starting to become more computerized in their businesses, that, the vulnerabilities are much easier to exploit. So they're just, they're targeting the small to medium businesses a lot more, finding them, as this slide says, very underprepared.
Yeah, no, it's unfortunate. I think that this is often a crime of opportunity, and so they literally are just spraying attacks across the entire internet, and literally a lot of this is just automated, and then once they find a vulnerability and once they find a system that they can operate, literally it's then they hands on keyboard start doing it, right? And so if you're a business in almost any industry, unless you're truly operating fully offline, which I don't know, maybe a lemonade stand or something, but even they might take Stripe payments. So kind of everybody. And so what is the strategy? I mean, we can sit here and throw our hands up and be scared, but I think really, we're big believers in, you got to tackle the problem, and you need to start somewhere. And I think, I think we in the cyber space can kind of learn a lot from kind of what's worked in other areas where they've fundamentally addressed risk. And I think one of the sort of best analogies is often around kind of how, we as how industries have addressed kind of the risk of fire, right? So one of the things that you have to do is, as an organization, you think about investing in your own resources and kind of getting your house in order, and the things that you can do to kind of limit and reduce your risk. And so, that's the IT equivalent of fire extinguishers and sprinklers and smoke alarms, etc. So there's that end of things to sort of reduce the frequency. There's also an investment in the collective resources, right? The proverbial, fire engines and fire companies, right? So that when things truly become catastrophic, or there is a real issue that goes beyond the resources that an individual organization can address, you have those tools at your disposal. And so, and this is kind of how we think about this problem as a barbell strategy. It's the technology on one end, and then it's insurance on the other, which is obviously why we're doing this call together. So, and with that, I'll turn things over to Dom, who will really talk about kind of the end of the barbell that addresses kind of technology and how to reduce the risk.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah. So when you look at your cybersecurity program in general, right? As Andy said in the previous slide, right? You want to reduce the risk, right? Even if you go to a cyber insurance firm like DataStream, who provides very comprehensive coverage and a lot of features in what they provide there, right? You're still expected to have some reasonable measures in place, right? You can't you can't be insured against theft if you leave the door just wide open. No insurance company is going to give you a reasonable premium in that regard, right? So really what I'm trying to do in this presentation is just give you an overview, right, for the typical small to medium-sized business as to how do you reduce your risk to a reasonable baseline so that you can have an effective relationship with somebody like DataStream on the cyber insurance side that works well for you, right? So I'm going to talk about three basic areas, right? So first is invest in your cybersecurity program, right? And a lot of small to medium-sized businesses don't have the resources or the wherewithal that large enterprise firms do to, determine what a cybersecurity framework and control standards and invest a lot in alignment and various third-party services and things like that, right? So, we have to kind of come up with, just a basic set of ideas that will work for companies that kind of fall into that small to medium-sized category, which is why we're going to talk about, what are the basic security controls that you need to have in place that are going to put you in a good position with regard to your security posture, right? And then how do you, plan for the potential failure, right? Because no environment is ever completely secure, right? The only way to secure a computer, the old adage is to unplug it, put it in a bag, and stuff it in a closet, right? So you need to have a layered approach to cybersecurity because ultimately various components of your cybersecurity controls will fail, and you need to have an incident response and recovery plan to handle the situation should that occur. Go ahead, Andy, move it on.
Yeah.
Right, so cybersecurity programs can be pretty complex, especially for small to medium-sized businesses, right? So I'm just going to kind of talk about it at a high level, right? Development, policies and procedures, right? You need to, basically lay out your strategy. What is it that you're going to do? What controls are you going to require in your environment, right? What are the operations processes? Then you need to look at your environment and say, okay, we've essentially decided this is what we're going to do. What are the areas that we're not doing? How do we remediate those issues by implementing new technologies or processes or adjusting what we do? And you need to then, from that point on, right, the hardest part where a lot of companies fall down is the monitoring and maintenance, right? There's things as a part of your cybersecurity program that you need to do on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, on an annual basis. You need to have some way of monitoring these technologies so that when they detect that something bad is happening in your environment, the right people are aware of it and actions are taken to do something about it. Go ahead, Andy.
Cool. Yeah, and I think, cool, go. Well, this is actually a slide that from our risk estimator tool, but I think, helping organizations have a few kind of simple metrics that they can look to and understand, all the things that Dom is talking about, what a good program looks like. I think one of the nice things about collaborating together is that we can kind of operate as sort of checks and balances, right? And make sure, we kind of put in context often what a posture looks like, and help us really kind of get a few sort of simple metrics that even if you're not a cybersecurity expert, you as a business owner or manager can kind of understand. But I'll pass it off back to you.
Yeah. Now, what this slide also demonstrates, right, is the idea of a layered security approach, right? Now, hopefully, right, I mean, the statistics are what they are, and they're pretty disappointing as we look at them, right? But hopefully, hopefully we can do better than this, teaming with our clients and teaming with DataStream to back us up, etc. Right? But you can see the statistics that generally show how low, the very low rate at which individual cybersecurity controls will detect an attack, right? So it illustrates the necessity to have layered security controls where in their aggregate they detect a much larger percentage of attacks. Once again, like to do better than 76%, but this is the actual statistical data that DataStream as an insurance provider has been able to put together, right? It shows that generally speaking, the business community is not doing it as well as it ought to be doing, which makes it more necessary for companies like DataStream to provide that insurance as a backup.
Yeah, yeah. What we certainly see is that and there's to some degree diminishing returns. You can usually get with the right investment, you can usually get somewhere into the 90s, right? If you're really doing things well. But to get to try and get into the really high 90s, right? Typically you'll spend 10x what you spent to get to the to just break into that. Into the 90s, and so that's really where it makes sense from a financial perspective. You obviously want to address as much as you can, but there is a portion of risk that you want to try and transfer and address with insurance. So,
go ahead.
This is you. Do you want to keep rolling on this?
Yep, I got it. Right. So, so just based on experience, right, and based on our partnership with DataStream and some of the information that they've gathered, right, we found that for small to medium-sized businesses, there's a relatively finite set of cybersecurity controls that will, that will keep you in a good position most of the time, right? Get you above that 76% in terms of being able to prevent an incident from happening in your environment, and also have that strong partnerships like DataStream, where they're comfortable working with you and backing you up should something occur, right?
Yeah.
So just to kind of walk through these, right? Perimeter firewall, that's pretty obvious, right? But it's not so obvious what constitutes these days a properly configured perimeter firewall, right? Where basically need to be very restricted, not just on inbound traffic, but reasonably restricted on outbound traffic, right? We're past the point in this, unfortunately in the cybersecurity landscape, where you can allow your users to go out on the internet and access anything they want any way they want, right? You need to have some, SMB filtering that goes along, or some web filtering that goes along with that, some various content and application filtering, etc. Right, and the new UTM firewalls are are pretty good at that sort of thing and offer those features. Multi-factor authentication for all external access. So those of you who are not familiar with multi-factor authentication, right, it's you're logging into a system or accessing a system, and it's the something and the something you have, right? A password, plus an authenticator token of some sort. There's tons of technologies that are out there. It's relatively inexpensive these days, and simply put, what it defends against is if you have remote access into your technology environment, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, or sensitive software as a service systems, like you might deal with a Salesforce or a QuickBooks Online or something like that, right? If somebody finds out your password, which is relatively easy to do these days,
yep,
right? They can get into your environment. Multi-factor authentication prevents that from happening, even if they have your password. So that's very valuable these days. It's essential. And endpoint detection and response software is a relatively new development in the cybersecurity industry, right? So what we found is, especially with the ransomware actors out there, that your standard antivirus software package is not sufficient anymore, right?
Yep.
Anybody who's gone through a ransomware response, my team has gone through quite a few of them, helping out businesses who were infected by ransomware. And I won't name names, but the top 5 or 6 antivirus software providers that have been out there for years and years, right? We always see that these things were in place and weren't enough to prevent the ransomware detection, right? So, or ransomware infections. So EDR software gives you the capability of some advanced threat detection, some heuristics and behavioral detection capability that can more effectively block the current threats that are out there. Vulnerability management, essentially what we're talking about there is a lot of people refer to this as the configuration hardening of your environment, right? So how are flaws introduced, whether it's in software or systems, that it's basically either a system that's not patched or a system that's not properly configured that allows a bad actor to essentially gain unauthorized access and do things to these systems, right? So you need a process by which these systems are properly configured, patched, and maintained, and tested for vulnerabilities that are identified and fixed on a regular basis. Spam filters for email, right? When we talk about that nowadays, I think almost everybody's aware that one of the most common ways that hackers infiltrate environments these days is by sending somebody a phishing email where they click on a link or a file that is malicious in some way and allow hackers access to the environment, right? So it's basically allows the hackers to take advantage of a user's computer that already has trusted access to the environment, right? So whether it's something that the built-in spam filtering technology in Microsoft 365 or any of the other vendors out there, right? Spam filters are essential for your environment.
Yeah.
And when all these controls fail, right? You need to have security awareness training in place, right? And that's one of the most important elements of a basic cybersecurity program, is to actually have a way of educating your users as to the threats that are out there, the techniques that hackers are using, proper usage of systems, and the measures that they should be taking, the things that they should be watching out for, right? Because by definition, your users have access to your environment because they need to be able to perform their jobs. So if they're letting the bad guys in, there's no way, or very little way, for you to prevent that 100% of the time, right? Used to be something that was very difficult to implement for small businesses. Now there's web-based security awareness training that is relatively inexpensive for businesses, very easily obtained, and very valuable. And finally, when all these controls fail and something bad happens in your environment, you need off-site backups for all your critical systems, right? And what we mean by off-site is not just backing the data up somewhere that's outside your environment so that if your building blows up or catches fire or something like that, you can recover somewhere else. But also, it's very important that your backups be not accessible via the same authentication parameters as your other systems, right? And one of the things that we've seen a lot out there is that the ransomware actors, when they infect an environment, right, they can see that this data is being backed up to another system, and if they can get into that other system with the same usernames and passwords that they used to get into the systems to infect them in the first place, they'll encrypt your backups too, and then you won't be able to restore. So you need to be able to make sure that your offsite backups are truly separated both physically and logically from your production systems.
Yeah, and John, I think this is a great list to roll through. I think, and maybe it sounds really simple to some folks. I think, if it's not glaringly obvious already, I mean, I think from what we see is really having an expert and a team that understands all these tools, understands how they play together, is really valuable. Because the devil is unfortunately in the details here, and just you can buy all the right stuff, but if you don't configure it correctly and make sure that it's maintaining correctly, that you might as well leave that stuff in the garage, right? And I think one of the benefits of kind of building a team, the team type approach which is what we espouse, is having some checks and balances, making sure that kind of how is this operating, and having kind of a very collaborative approach, and understanding you as a business owner obviously want to understand what's going on, but also nice to kind of have a team outside of yourself who can kind of say, yes, this does seem to be working. We can check this off, right? And you see that. I mean, that's why we chose this image, right? Like, this is why planes don't fall out of the sky. It's why buildings don't burn down. The sort of practices and procedures that have worked for a lot of other complex systems. I think as the overall IT ecosystem starts to mature, you're going to see this, and you're going to see the private market solve it, right? It's coming. I think we're just early in this story. So.
Right, and once again, a comprehensive cybersecurity program is necessary, right? But a lot of small to medium-sized businesses who either have internal IT folks or an IT provider they've been working with for a while, and they're turning around and saying, okay, well, we need to address this cybersecurity thing, right? We try to narrow this down to, right, okay, if you have these 7 basic controls in place and they're properly implemented, right, now you're in a good position. There's other gaps around this that that we'll talk about it as the presentation goes on, but ultimately this list represents the place to start.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay. All right, so a couple other necessary pieces, right, is the idea of having an incident response plan and a system data recovery plan, right? And a lot of these can, there's a lot available online. There's in terms of basic incident response plans, but the basic pieces there are, okay, walking through scenarios of these are the types of threats, these are the types of things that can happen in our environment from a security breach perspective, right? Whether, right, and obviously, ransomware or, system compromise or, an internal user sharing information that they shouldn't, or, those sorts of things. Right, and walk through those scenarios as a business team and decide, okay, well, here's what we're going to do should these things happen, right? You don't want to be in a position where the first time you think about what you're going to do about something is the moment that it happens, right? So it can be a relatively informal exercise of walking through various scenarios, sitting around a conference room table, and just understanding and putting together a list of what you would do in the should these various scenarios occur and who would be responsible for what, right? And it will also identify gaps. Okay, well, we don't have the capability to do these particular steps in response to an incident, so we're going to reach out to a cybersecurity firm and we're going to have them on retainer so that should this sort of thing ever occur, we know who we're going to call, right? And obviously DataStream is going to be one of those calls if you go with cyber insurance, right? And they also help organizations put together incident response strategies and identify the right people to call. And certainly calling your cyber insurance company is one of the very first steps, because they're going to help you monetarily in dealing with your response. Right.
Yeah. I would say, having talked with, we talked with incident responders, not every day, but typically on a weekly basis. And one of the things is just having a plan, even just practicing it, right? Typically an incident is never going to go how you planned it will go, but the fact that you've kind of have that capability, that you've practiced some version of this, is really, really valuable. And, just little lessons like, where is the incident response plan? Is it in the computer that would get ransomware, or is it, printed off somewhere or has been sent to somebody else? I mean, it's just all the little lessons that you experience, and really getting pulled into that ecosystem of kind of the folks that are dealing with this every day. Dom's organization is really great, and then we also are connected to a lot of the law firms that they're literally handling 3,000 incidents a year. So it's just massive, the learnings that take place out of these, and really having a plan and being ready. And I think just makes everything really, really live and real for people to experience. How do you make that, have that panic moment in a practice, not when it's when your computers are all, have a ransomware note showing up on them. So.
Right, and smaller businesses are not going to have the capabilities of the large enterprise companies like we work with, where not only do they have a system and data recovery plan, but they actually go through exercises where, once a year, where they shut down their main data center and verify that they can do a full recovery, and they'll actually test these things, right? But as you put these things together, to the degree that you can walk through them and verify that certain components are working, right? It's important to do that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, to build off your sort of, I think small businesses should appreciate that some of the benefits that they have of being a small business, right? A large enterprise is so much more complicated, that they have so much more bespoke stuff. A small enterprise can really rely, one, on kind of expert networks like Dom's groups and others, where they're maybe seeing a lot of different environments, but also you can use some of the sort of resources and the sort of generic nature of what you're doing. You can use the cloud, the cloud system, so that it's really quickly for you to recover. I think just thinking, high level, obviously spend a lot of time thinking about avoiding incidents, but also make sure that you spend some time actually planning for when an incident may happen, right? And if you spend, even just a little bit of time there, you're going to be kind of way ahead of the game, that you can respond really, really well. So I think we may have lost Dom. We may have lost Dom's audio. So I'll at least kick off this slide for him. Yeah, Dom, I don't think we can hear you because I think your headphones, your mic died. Maybe a different one. But I think, the strategies, right? Obviously segmentation is really valuable, just kind of separating stuff so that when something happens, it doesn't turbo your whole network. Encryption of everything sensitive, and those are sort of off the shelf, pretty easy to implement, right? Doing some third-party risk assessment as well, I think can be really, really valuable. And then also just having, test what you put in place, right? And Dom and STI can help with that. And then, having an MSP in place, I think it's, security is hard and it's complicated. And I think, for most small business organizations, if you could, if they have their own IT person, expecting that person to be sort of like the MacGyver of IT and cyber is really to expect, sort of a superhero to walk through your door. And if the person is really, really that good, they're in high demand. There's a huge shortage of qualified talent in the cybersecurity industry overall. So, those people have lots and lots of opportunities, and you want someone who is really touching a lot of different environments and maybe just seeing a lot of incidents, so I think for the most part, we really think most organizations should have an MSP as part of their strategy. You may have an internal IT team as well, depending on kind of your size and your needs, but having those experts be a part of it is really valuable as well. And so, and then obviously, there's things that you can address individually, but there's also things that collectively you need to think about as well, that you need to address. And that's really how you think about insurance, right? And it needs to be, it needs to be kind of a part of your strategy, and making sure that you have a good policy in place. It's typically remarkably inexpensive, and it's just going to save you in the case of an incident. I mean, the number of horror stories we've heard from folks that don't have insurance is kind of scary. And Dom, thanks for jumping back on.
Yeah, sorry about that. My headset died, and this is not a particular platform like Zoom that I'm familiar with. But
yeah, no worries.
I caught what you were saying. You hit most of the salient points. going, talking to this slide a little bit more, I think that, it's important that everybody understand, right, that, just the components that happen, in your typical, when there's a major breach, especially ransomware or something like that, right? So you're talking about, having to bring in an incident response team to identify what happened, what systems were affected, gather the necessary forensics data, should there be some sort of litigation in the matter somewhere down the line, isolating the intrusion so that it doesn't spread and become worse, right? Bringing your environment back online in a safe manner, whether that involves hardening systems, rebuilding systems, segmenting networks as a response, right? Not to mention potentially having to pay off the ransomware actors, or deal with external suits by service providers or customers who are coming at you, and the legal fees associated with that, right? So all of these elements that you might think of, and there's a slide, either the next slide or the slide after, where some of the numbers are shared, but these things easily run into the hundreds of thousands, right? Even even in the most mild of scenarios, right? So if you think about your day-to-day run rate and your cash flow of your business and all the things that you normally have to deal with, right? Dropping a couple $100,000 just to get your business back online in a safe manner and deal with all the repercussions, right? Yeah. You need somebody like a DataStream who's going to be able to back you up there.
Yeah, I think one of the statistics that I saw sort of high level, and Don, we're getting a little echo. I don't know if you have a set of headphones you can put in. Typically we see the ransom that people pay is less than half the cost of a total incident, right? So it can be pretty expensive, and easily run north of $1 million. This is a breakdown from kind of the types of costs that get included in an incident, and then here's another slide that sort of looks at kind of the ROI of our of different solutions, as well as cyber insurance in there. And these are some sort of example numbers, but typically we find that the ROI on a cyber insurance policy is pretty massive. We actually had a question from the audience that said, premiums are up significantly this year, and so not quite as cheap as it once was. The 2 to 3x, we've not seen that. I mean, some MSPs are probably on the very, very top end of the risk profile. So if you are an MSP, that's probably where we've seen the biggest increase. Most businesses, on average, we've seen increases of about 30%. And so, if you are facing a big increase, I would say call us and see what we can do, or ping our website, and see if we can get you something better. But go ahead.
Andy, can you hear me now? Or
I can hear you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've dealt with a lot of businesses, aligning them with DataStream. Really, what it comes down to is, obviously, if you're an MSP, right? And I had this listed on one of my slides earlier, and unfortunately, it had not. I dropped off for a bit, but right, if you're a service provider to businesses, right, by definition, you have trusted access not just to your own environment, but to a lot of other environments, right? And that drives up the risk. And one way to manage that risk is to have more enhanced cyber security controls, so that the cyber insurance organization is comfortable giving you a lower premium, right? If you can demonstrate the veracity of those controls and the effectiveness of those controls, then you're in a much better position to get a more attractive premium deal.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing that even more. I mean, the reason that we built DataStream was to kind of help organizations with their MSPs start to demonstrate what they're doing, with actual kind of hard numbers. We're associated with a big cyber reinsurance firm, so we have one of the biggest data sets, thus the name, around around kind of what's actually happening with cyber losses, but for the most part, the underwriters haven't had a clean enough and big enough data set to really to really quantify how impactful the different security controls are on overall cyber risk. And so we built a data model that incorporates that as much as possible, and then are actively adding kind of building a track record with businesses to show, hey, actually, if you are doing the things that that Dom has mentioned earlier in this presentation, here's why your loss expectations should be lower, and then the insurance costs will start to match that. I think some of the numbers that came out, particularly in 2020, 2020 just torched a lot of insurance books, particularly ransomware payments. You think rough pricing, and it depends a lot on your industry and the amount of revenue that you have, but rough pricing should be about between $1,000 and $7,000 per $1 million of coverage, right? So, and you could stack that, right? And one of the questions was, how much would $10 million of coverage be? It really depends on the industry, and I would say ping us, because that's a big range, right? So between 10,000 and 70,000 for 10 million, but
I would also want to add to that, Andy, right? When you're looking at these things, right, and this is how we partner with a lot of our clients, as well as DataStream, putting these things together, right? $10 million coverage, well, it's going to be expensive, right? So, at some, you need to balance, okay, how much are we going to invest in the cybersecurity controls so that the amount of insurance that we would need to cover the scenarios that we need to plan for can be, as low as possible, right?
Yeah.
And depending on how your business is built and the information that you deal with, right, there's a balance between how much you invest in the cybersecurity controls and how much you invest in the insurance to cover the gap there, right? And that's going to vary significantly, right? But you need to put together a comprehensive plan that includes both and says, okay, well, here's what our controls are going to cover. Here's the risk associated with what we don't have covered through our cybersecurity controls. Here's the potential monetary damage associated with that in terms of having to respond and recover, and other ancillary impacts, right? So that is the amount of insurance that we're going to need to cover, right? So you need to look at it from that holistic view as you put
and I think
your insurance plan.
One of the things, and why I really think that you want a team of experts who understands kind of both your organization, what you're doing on the technology side, and also what the threat landscape looks like, is I think the way that cyber risk gets solved is a little bit like somewhat of the pathway that we saw. We haven't cured cancer, but cancer is there's been tremendous amount of effort, and the survivability of different cancers is very, very high in many cases, because cancer is really it's many diseases, and cyber risk is not one real risk, it's several different risks. And so, the different types of attacks that may hit your business, depending on what type of business you're in, and what kind of vulnerabilities you have, and also not only from a technological perspective, but the actual, how could someone kind of put you in the pain cave, to use a technical term, thinking through that. Is ransomware more of an issue, or is losing data more of an issue? Is fraudulent transfer, where they're going to get in the middle of the invoice? All of these require slightly different strategies, and so thinking about not only preventing them, but also how you potentially limit the damage. All those things are going to impact what your insurance rates are. Also going to sort of guide your investment in a technology strategy. But great questions. Anybody else have sort of questions from the audience? Happy to kind of want to make sure that this is really answering what the questions that you guys may have. So feel free to just put those in the chat and we can see them. I think one of the questions that just while we wait for those to come in, one that I often get is, how do we make sure that when we have coverage, that if we end up having an incident, that we do have coverage. I think unfortunately some folks, there's sort of a reputation around some insurance products in the cyberspace that they really are not going to be there when you need it. And so I think for one, I think just make sure you've got a really good policy, right? And we really would recommend that you have your own, that you would have a standalone cyber policy. I mean, classically, there've been some stuff that it's been just a rider on your existing policy. It's a one-page document. We really think you should have, standalone policy that's going to do you just much more clear about what's covered and what's not. Those policies tend to be incredibly broad in what they cover. But then, you never want to lie on an insurance application, right? You want to make sure that that's insurance fraud, so you literally could, it's a criminal offense, but also, if you end up lying on a policy and then you need it, that's gonna get discovered as part of the process, and then you're not gonna have coverage. So make sure that you're honest, but also make sure that you're documenting what you've done, and that's one of the things that we can, STI and us can do together for you, is to make sure, okay, here are the things that you attested to in your in your application, and so here's the documentation, that shows, here's why you put in, how you put in multi-factor authentication. Here's how you put in, your backups. Here's how you put in incident response. All of those sorts of things. If you've got that way, if there's ever if you ever in an incident and there's a question about, well, you said you did these things, you've got a really good a good set of paperwork that you can quickly turn over to a claims team or the law firms that are going to be involved. So here's what we were doing, and unfortunately still something happened. So we see another question coming in. Why are cyber incidents so expensive? Dom, you could probably, you've been involved in a number of them on the sort of remediation side, and do you want to take that?
Sure. I mean, I spoke about it a little bit earlier, right? So, first and foremost, there's the interruption to your business, right? So, so if your systems are down or information is stolen, you need to allocate resources to perform the forensics, identify what has happened, the extent of the damage, how to contain that damage, etc. Right? Most small businesses are going to have to hire a cybersecurity firm to come in and do those things for them, because they're not going to have the in-house expertise, because of course having people with that level of skill and knowledge would cost you a lot more than your day-to-day IT resources, right? So, so hiring the team to come in, assess the situation, perform the forensics, get it under control, rebuild your environment to the extent that it has to be rebuilt in order for you to resume business, and then make sure that systems are isolated, new cybersecurity controls are put in place to prevent a recurrence, right? And keep in mind that as all this is going on, your business is losing revenue because systems are out, processes can't be executed, resources are not available for the day-to-day business, right? Not to mention, Andy mentioned, legal relationships, right? You almost always have to pull your legal resources to the table, and pay a law firm or a lawyer to handle any of the ancillary matters that may come up with regard to third parties and communication with regulatory agencies or anybody else that you have to deal with there. Right, so those things jump. I've never seen an incident response matter of any reasonable impact to the business, right? And I'm not talking about just, okay, this computer had a virus and we pulled it offline, or somebody defaced our website, right? There's simple matters like that are relatively easily dealt with. That could have been worse but weren't. But anything of any significance, I've never seen it cost anybody less than $100,000 to deal with, right? Even if just a few systems were infected with ransomware, or some information was stolen and somebody's threatening to post that online, or a system's been compromised, right? These things easily add up to the point where, if you have a relationship with someone like DataStream, you're immediately thankful that you did.
Yeah, just to throw some sort of rough numbers at it, I saw a stat in a recent report that, the average ransomware incident takes an organization kind of offline for, on average, 19 days, right? We saw not quite that with the pipeline, but they were close to a week, right? And obviously throwing every resource at it, and then the full recovery from an incident, that number is often kind of stretching into kind of close to 300 days, right? So it's, there's the immediate, but the pain of that can extend really, really long. And so a good policy is going to include kind of not only the coverage of remediation, but also business interruption. So it would cover kind of lost revenue and expenses, unavoidable expenses during that period. The other thing that I think that maybe is less folks are less aware of is, the regulatory fines and penalties and potential. You open yourself up to class action lawsuits if you lose a lot of individuals' data, and there is. There's huge benefit for you as an organization to have really, to done the right things, and to have documentation on that, right? So, cyber incidents happen, but if you end up being in court and you basically, your answer is, well, we didn't know about that, or we didn't do that, or those aren't acceptable answers. You really do have to. As a business owner, you are responsible for the data that you have and the parties that you touch, and there's a reasonable level, and we'll probably do another event kind of on what that, how to calculate that, because there's a big move coming out, sort of the reasonableness of programs to make sure that you've done what you need to. So those are some things that you want to think about as a business owner, and really, with a team that's helping you, you should be sort of thinking about how you show what reasonableness is, and that you've thought about this, so that if an event happens, right, they happen, but you can say, hey, we were, it's not like we weren't aware of this and we weren't trying, but still these things happen. Any other questions? What other things might people want to hear about? But we're getting close to time, so I think we're gonna close pretty soon. But any last questions before we kind of let folks go? Well, then I would say, for both of us, easy to reach us, on our website. You can always just, hop on our website, click the chat bot. You can just ping me, Andy at DataStreamInsurance.com. Pretty simple, and we can talk to you about any of your insurance needs. And then Dom's posting his stuff right here, and I'll just put my stuff right here. We obviously, this is our business, but we're also we're encyclopedic on this space. We are a pure cyber insurance firm. We focus exclusively on partnering with MSPs and other folks in the IT space to make sure that their customers have really, really great coverage. And we're here to kind of help folks in this ecosystem. It's a passion of ours. I think we've just heard too many stories about individuals that ended up having an incident, and that ended up crippling their business, even having them file for bankruptcy. So yes, we are a cyber insurance broker. We also we're a little bit more than a broker, though, because we have a significant relationship with the cyber insurance reinsurance business. So we've got a ton of data and a team kind of analyzing cyber risk. So we can obviously get people really great coverage, but we're also here to kind of help them really understand what their cyber posture looks like, what's happening in the ecosystem. And then Dom's obviously, just a top quality MSP and MSSP to help with incidents. So Ping us, hop on our website, come find us. We'd love to have a conversation. I'll put my phone number as well. Happy to chat with anybody who has any questions. Yeah, no, the last question, I think, how would we compare to kind of traditional brokers? There's some great brokers out there, but for the most part, we find that they're not as kind of focused exclusively on cyber, and cyber is such a unique and different insurance product than anything else. So there's just a lot of detail that's there, and so we're here to kind of be that resource. We also kind of uniquely collaborate on the technology side with MSPs and other folks in the cybersecurity industry to really understand what's happening there, and to give you a lot of tools. We think, we saw a couple slides out of kind of our risk estimator tool. That's looks really simple, but there's just a huge amount of data that goes behind that. That's built off kind of a data set covering millions of companies and looking at hundreds of different types of incidents, mapping them against the kind of types of attacks that we see, as well as the mitigations that are in place. So, we don't have time to go into all the details, but we really are, building what we believe to be a better mousetrap, and that sort of collaboration between ourselves and the technology side of the house is pretty unique in the market. And so I want to thank Dom and his whole team. Anybody have any questions, ping us. We'll send out some transcripts out of this, and also send you guys, we can send some sort of fun initial materials and stuff that is really actionable. So maybe we'll, I think one of the best is just sort of like a basic incident response plan. So, what we'll do is follow up in the next few days with the folks who registered for this, with a copy of one of those that I think really makes sense. That's pretty actionable, and starting to think about what would be really good if you end up having an incident. Any other thoughts from you, Dom, before we kind of let folks go? Oh, I think we lost Dom. Oh, maybe he's back. Yeah, we can hear you. Sorry. Awesome. Guys, ping us if you have questions. Thanks so much. Cheers.